I'm Tina Daheley with you until 2. Now, the man in charge of handling complaints about the NHS says that too many people are dying from sepsis. Rob Behrens, the UK's health ombudsman, warned that the same mistakes which were highlighted in a major report over 10 years ago were still being made and that significant improvements are needed. Now, sepsis develops when the body's immune system overreacts to an infection and attacks its own tissues and organs. There are various symptoms, but they can be similar to those of flu and include severe breathlessness and a high fever. According to the UK Sepsis Trust, there are around 48,000 deaths from sepsis-related illnesses each year, and thousands of these could be prevented. Just this year, our very own Tony Blackburn was in hospital with sepsis and pneumonia. We're lucky to still have him after he made a recovery. Well, in a brand new report, the Ombudsman, Mr. Behrens, found that in spite of recommendations made back in 2013, a decade ago, there were still delays in spotting and treating the condition in hospitals. He also identified issues with insufficient staff training, poor communication, poor record keeping and missed opportunities for follow-up care. NHS England says it's working to improve sepsis management. Are you someone who was blindsided by this very dangerous illness? It can come incredibly quickly and seemingly out of nowhere. Perhaps you're keen to share what you went through so that other people are more aware of the danger posed by the condition. Email us, please, vine@bbc.co.uk. Do include your number so we can call you back. You can text 88291 or WhatsApp us 08000 288 291. First, let's go to Dr. Ron Daniels, who's an intensive care doctor in Birmingham and also head of the UK Sepsis Trust. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to start with the basics and what exactly is sepsis, because a lot of people don't really understand what it is.
So, as you've said, sepsis is the way the body responds to an infection. So it's always triggered by an infection, and, Tony Blackburn's illness, pneumonia, is the most common cause, but it can be something as simple as a UTI, a urinary infection, or even a cut or a bite or a sting. But in sepsis, the body's immune system goes into overdrive, and if we don't stop it, that causes organ damage.
OK, and is this the same as septicemia?
So we used to call this septicemia, but that term has, in sort of medical terminology, has become a bit redundant now. So sepsis is the current term.
And in some ways, it's pretty staggering that we are being told today that too many people are dying from sepsis because of the same mistakes highlighted 10 years ago. What's gone wrong?
Well, it's awful, isn't it? It's horrendous to think that exactly the same things that were befalling people a decade ago are still happening now. And we have to remind ourselves that that means that nearly 500,000 people are likely to have died in the intervening period. Now, we can't pretend that all of those lives can be saved. But as you said, many of them can. The NHS in England achieved a lot between 2016 and 2019, and the government sort of funded a fairly soft public awareness campaign that we've since continued as a charity. But, of course, since that time, we've had a global pandemic, and the NHS, on emergence from that pandemic, has found itself very under-resourced, particularly in terms of staff. So we need to get back. We need to do a lot more around public awareness, health professional awareness, but also building resource into healthcare systems and a culture that encourages those health professionals to look for sepsis.
Can you drill down into some of the detail from this report? What problems does it highlight specifically?
Well, there were problems with follow-up of patients. There was something that we in medicine call confirmation bias, where a patient perhaps is sent into hospital by their GP, and in this situation, the patient was thought to have had a stroke, but it turned out he had sepsis. And the problem that we have is that health professionals sort of follow the first health professional's diagnosis, and it takes someone laterally thinking to come up with a different diagnosis. So that was one problem. Another problem was lack of rapid blood tests being applied to patients so that they couldn't spot the blood changes that we see in sepsis quickly enough. And that brings us on to a third problem, which is sometimes those blood results are not turned around quickly enough by our laboratories. But as you said at the beginning, the common theme through all of this was communication. It's communicating with patients and their families, it's safety netting them so that they know when to ask for help, and it's communication between health professionals so that we don't see huge delays.
And record keeping was an issue too.
Yeah, absolutely. And as many hospitals move toward electronic patient records rather than paper-based systems, some of the nuances that we would tend to record on paper can sometimes be lost with those systems. So while they can be helpful in automating prompts to senior doctors, they also carry their own problems.
And speed is the key thing here, isn't it? It's treatable. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. It's treatable if it's caught quickly. But the problem then you have is that it's hard to detect sepsis.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not pretending that sepsis is easy to spot. That's why getting this right demands that our public are empowered and our health professionals are not only trained, but working in an environment that supports them.
Yeah.
But, we have to do this. This is something that we wouldn't accept if this was a condition like cancer or a heart attack or a stroke. It should not be a postcode lottery. It shouldn't be dependent upon the hospital the patient goes to and the individual health professionals caring for them, whether they get their treatment quickly or not.
Yeah.
Because with every hour we delay with sepsis, the chance of surviving drops by 1 or 2%.
Goodness. So, Dr. Ron, empower us, empower our listeners. How do you spot this? What should the average person be looking out for?
So the first thing to do is to trust your instincts. You've seen your loved one unwell before. If something doesn't feel quite right, and particularly if they're getting worse, not better, then it's go to 111 and just ask, could it be sepsis? But if you're panicking, if you think they are critically ill, then there are 6 key symptoms to look out for, and they spell the word sepsis. Slurred speech or confusion, E for extreme pain in the muscles or joints, P for passing no urine, no water in a day, S for severe breathlessness, I for it feels like I'm going to die, and people really do say that, and then the final S for skin that's mottled, discoloured or very pale. Any one of those 6, it's go straight to A&E.
Right, that's such crucial information. Everyone really needs to know that, don't they? And before we let you go, we should mention Martha's Law, because Martha Mills died of sepsis age 13 after falling off her bike. Her mother had raised concerns about sepsis. Doctors did not listen. And now the government wants to give patients the legal right to a second medical opinion. Will that work, or will it put even more pressure on an already under-resourced NHS?
Well, they've always technically had the right to ask for a second opinion. What this is, it's about making it visible. It's about removing the barriers to families gaining a second opinion. Now, this is really important. And for some patients, it will help their families to advocate and get them the attention they need. But of course, it's only part of the solution. Firstly, we need to think about where the resources are coming from in hospitals to make this happen. But secondly, we can't put all of this on our families. We have to improve our clinical systems, improve our training, improve the culture within hospitals to make sure that it's spotted every time.
Dr. Ron Daniels, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. Dr. Ron is from the UK Sepsis Trust. And next, let's speak to Mark Oakes, who is from Essex and who joins me in the studio. And Mark, you contracted sepsis out of the blue and it nearly killed you. What happened?
Entirely right, Tina. Literally, I was just cleaning the windows one day. I felt my shoulder feel slightly uncomfortable about 11 a.m. 5 p.m. that day, I couldn't move my arm at all. I was out with my son at a birthday party. Managed to get myself home, drive home, and then I went to bed that night with fever. So I was hot temperature, uncontrolled shivering. So hearing what Dr. Ron's just said, had I known what I know now, these would have been alarm bells, but for me they weren't. Following day, though, I did go to A&E because my arm didn't move. And unfortunately, at that time, the A&E service, the GP there, felt I had a frozen shoulder and that I needed to see an orthopaedic surgeon, and I was discharged to see an orthopaedic surgeon.
So you were discharged, and before we go on, actually, I should say, you're sitting in front of me, you were fit, healthy, you still look fit and healthy, bodybuilding, karate, cycling, don't smoke, don't drink, the picture of health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I knew very little about sepsis before contracting it. And having since contracted and being now termed a sepsis survivor, I think one of the things to be really clear about is sepsis does not discriminate. And I should never be immune from anything, but if I can catch this kind of disease, literally anybody can.
So you were sent home, but you became more ill.
Yeah, I was sent home and I went to see an orthopaedic surgeon on the Wednesday. The orthopaedic surgeon did an MRI and an X-ray, and then unfortunately he was away for a few days. Now, during that week, that 7-day period, without being too graphic, I'd stopped going to the toilet. So we heard about not passing water. For me, that was not the case. It was the other. So I wasn't going to the toilet, but I blamed that on the pain medication I'd been put on. By the end of that week, I hadn't been to the toilet for a week. I was increasingly breathless, and it was my wife who said we should measure your SATs. So SATs is your oxygen within your blood, and she measured them using an Apple Watch. My SATs on the Apple Watch came up to be 68%, and just for context, they should be 98, 99, and at less than 70 you should probably be, unconscious. Didn't believe that could be the case, so we measured it again, and then it was really my wife who convinced me, this is unacceptable. You need to go to hospital. I went into the hospital. They agreed. Apparently an Apple Watch and other smartwatches are really accurate in this matter, because I kind of thought maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's just an Apple Watch. But they were like, no, these things are accurate. And they performed surgery on me that
on
day.
your shoulder?
On my shoulder, yeah. They felt that's where there was infection. And then whilst I was whilst they were doing the surgery, my lungs failed. My kidney failed.
So your organs started to fail?
Yeah, and I say kidney, liver, lungs filled with fluid. And then I was kept under for 15 hours. And I woke up the following day in intensive care where I spent 10 days.
And your family then having to deal with this at the same time, thinking you had a problem with your shoulder, and then being told to come and say their goodbyes?
Yeah, I mean, I've got at the time 7-year-old son and a wife, and they were told, or my wife was told, Mark is, he's really poorly, and you would need to consider bringing your son in to say goodbye. My wife was adamant that wasn't a thing, and that I would be fine. He's strong, he's fit, he's a fighter, and the doctors were very clear and honest, and they said to her the infection is getting stronger quicker than he is. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, and I came through the other side.
You did. You made a recovery. You're sitting here now. I mean, and you're still having work done on your shoulder, is that right?
I have, but I think now it's done. I had surgery on that time, and then I had 3 further surgeries. So my last, and I say last because I think it's going to be final, surgery was the 1st of August. I went to the bone infection unit in Oxford. They were outstanding. They've taken out, I had rotator cuff repair in 2009. And so I had an anchor there, a piece of metal. And by all accounts, these kind of foreign bodies can be the source of or the site that localises septic arthritis, so like knee replacement, joint replacement. So they've taken out that piece of metal. And to use a medical term coined by the professor who did the surgery, he said it was minging behind there.
Right.
So yeah, they've taken all of that out. So I think there's no infection in there now. I was treated at the time for a week with high-dose antibiotics. I'm off all of that now, and I'm just rehabbing a shoulder. So I had shoulder surgery to repair the rotator cuff like anybody might. So yeah, no, I'm going to be 100%.
Brilliant to hear. But how do you reflect on the do you consider yourself lucky?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And kind of for 2 reasons, really. I knew very little about sepsis before contracting the condition. And I work in healthcare environment, but I still knew very little about it. But now that I know more about it, I've met other sepsis survivors who are in a less fortunate position than me. I've met multiple people who've had multiple limbs amputated, and equally there's the large amount of people, like we say, about 50,000 people a year in the UK who don't survive from sepsis. So I consider myself very lucky from that. And then secondly, we all love our families. We appreciate the people around us. That's really dialed up for me. So I'm grateful for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know that your wife, you credit with being the reason you got through this.
Yeah, and I'm going to give her a name. My wife's name is Heather. So we're not talking about her in the third person.
No.
So yeah, I credit Heather with very much making me I am a stubborn person from time to time, and I credit her with saying that the smartwatch says you need to go to hospital, and making me. I was resistant to it. And all joking aside, the hospital did say to me, fit, healthy people like yourself are the worst, because you kind of feel that you'll be fine, you're immune. Yeah. Yes. So I absolutely endorse what's been said. if you have any of those signs and symptoms, get yourself seen as soon as possible by a medical professional, or at the very least dial 111.
Well, listen, Mark, thank you so much for coming in, sharing your story in the hope, I'm sure, that it will help other people and raise awareness as well. Mark Oakes, if you've been affected, 88291 on the text.